Welcome to the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, episode 11. In this episode, I am joined by Faizan Ali, an entrepreneur with experience across multiple industries, including IT, music, hospitality, sports, and media. Faizan's ventures include launching an IT company, building a recording studio from scratch, and co-owning multiple restaurants. In this episode, we explore the role Faizan's family has played in his journey, his strategic approach to business, and his process for identifying new business opportunities. We also discuss the importance of having a long-term vision, his principles for building and maintaining trust within teams, and his passion for mentoring young professionals who are on their own journey. As always, thank you for listening. If you enjoy the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leaving a comment or a review is also a great way to help out. And if you have any feedback or suggestions for future episodes, do not hold back and share your thoughts. I do read all the comments. And with all of that out of the way, here is Faizan Ali. All right, Faizan. At one point in your life, you mentioned you owned 6 restaurants, and across your career, you've had ventures in at least IT, in sports, and in media. If you could take me back to the beginning, how did you come to the conclusion that starting your own business was the right step to take?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. Let's correct a few things that I mentioned to you. I mean, not correct, like just a little bit tweaked. When I said that I own 6 restaurants, I was a shareholder in 6 restaurants or more. The reason why I feel like it is very important to differentiate between an ownership and partnership is because when you're in a partnership, there are a lot of other people who are assisting you in a lot of things. And that is something which will be important when we are discussing further down the road on a few other topics as well. And that's why I just wanted to highlight that. My history with my work, my entrepreneurship started in Malaysia. When I was in Malaysia, I had a few opportunities. My father was working in oil and gas. My brother was working in IT. He's a software engineer. So there are a few influential people in my life who I was looking up to when I was growing up. But looking at my own skill sets, I had to make decisions which would benefit me. I am a very curious person. I love exploring things. I love experiencing new adventures. I like exploring people who are doing extraordinary things around me. And I get inspired very easily. Maybe it's a bad thing, maybe it's a good thing. It all depends on your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So in Malaysia, I went because my father worked in oil and gas, and it was my decision at that moment. I had a decision to make whether to move to Malaysia or move to UK. I got accepted in both universities in Malaysia and UK as well. It was more towards a few things. First of all, of course, expenses. Who doesn't keep that as a priority as well? But at the same time, the important thing for me was that my father would be with me if I moved to Malaysia. And that was a very good decision, in my opinion, because when I moved to Malaysia, the same year, not the same year, the next year, my father moved to Malaysia as well. And then my whole family moved to Malaysia. And that helped me a lot. I feel like this is one of the things that a lot of people don't really elaborate on, or maybe don't really accept wholeheartedly. But for me, I feel like this is something which I personally want to really appreciate, is the assistance from my family. When I say that, I'm not just saying because of saying it. I personally feel I am what I am right now, and the experiences that I had because of the sacrifices that my father made, and because every single thing that I did was because I could lean on my father. And that is something that I don't want to take away from my father. I feel like I have made a lot of mistakes in my past, but the reason why I was able to make those mistakes and still move on and get into another mistake, I should say maybe, was because I knew that at the back, my father has my back and he will support me regardless of how much I, um, how should I say, in polite words, pardon my French. Yeah. So that is one of the things that I feel was very important for me. And that is how I was able to explore a lot of things. And in Malaysia, I ventured into, once I finished my graduation, I ventured into an IT company. That was my first company that I created. And that was because I had people around me who were already practicing IT. I knew a software developer and I knew a person who had good connections in the industry. So it was a relatively easy decision for me to make to bring all of them on board. And then we opened a company. And that is how my career, like a proper career, started. Mm,
And how did you determine that you were ready to start a business? Because I can imagine that seemed that you were still busy or just wrapping up your studies. That starting a business is quite a big step.
Yeah. Actually, it's a really good question. I think it all happened because I was in Malaysia. If it was not for
Hmm.
Malaysia, maybe if I was in another country, I would probably not start a business. And the reason why I'm saying this is because in Malaysia, for somebody who has just graduated, it is not really easy to find a job if you are not from a specific field. For example, if you're from IT, it is highly likely that you will get a job.
Hmm.
But somebody who has done business studies, which is a very general subject, right?
Yeah.
So unless it is very specific, like what kind of business, or then it becomes a different story. But even then, it depends on who you know and like what level are you coming in, because the regulations in Malaysia for foreigners, it's a little bit tough to follow through. So it is not very easy for somebody who's a fresh graduate and a foreign student to get a job straight away.
Hmm.
Probably internships, but you need a different visa for it, right? So you can't really work, and you can do internships while you're studying, but after your studies is over, then you need to change your visa. So then it becomes a difference. And
Right.
because my family was already there, and my father was still working, so it was a really relatively easy decision for me to make, rather than come back to Pakistan, where I am actually residing right now, or
Hmm.
I could move to another country, but that would be starting from scratch again.
Hmm.
So it was an easy decision for me to actually stay in Malaysia, open my own company. And who knows, because at that point, we actually saw Malaysia as a place where we can settle down, like properly settle down. My father could actually retire over there, because all in all, Malaysia has a lot of opportunities if you are from a certain status, like a financial status. So it is a very good country if you want to live over there. They are very open with religious views. Like, you can find all religions over there. All religions are living happily. So you won't feel any um, like religious racism, I would say. It's because everybody is living over there in quite a good harmony. Um, and economy is relatively good. Infrastructure is relatively good. So it was a very good decision at that point for me to make, and it was a very easy decision for me to make.
Right. And you mentioned that you had a couple of students who either provided some knowledge or had contacts in the IT industry that you brought together to start this company. What was
Not
the
students,
company?
they were actually professionals. That's why I actually opened the
Ah,
company with them. Yeah.
gotcha. Okay. So tell me about the company and what you were trying to solve with that or trying to build.
So basically, it was my first adventure. So I wanted to play it safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the reason why I didn't really experiment with it. I was mostly into getting some clients and just get the ball rolling.
Mm-hmm.
And because when you first start off, you're always hesitant and you know that there is a big risk that it will fail.
Yeah.
Uh, m- Maybe because you are afraid, maybe because um, it's your first adventure, you don't have enough experience. You're still trying to understand whether this is something that you want to do in the future or not. And for me, I knew from day one that it will just be a step in a direction which will follow through towards completely different goal for me. So it was
Mm-hmm.
a stepping stone for me. That's about it. I knew that I'm not going to continue that for a long period of time. And that is because
Right.
I was
Okay.
not from an IT background.
Mm-hmm. And what is primarily your background?
My primary background, I would say, is business, entrepreneurship. Uh, and the interest that I have is basically, you can say, multimedia. So I want to be like an influencer kind of thing, but a
Mm-hmm.
different way, not the TikTok one, but
Right.
something
Gotcha.
more towards um, like a news channel or something like that, something which is closer to reality, I would say.
Yeah. So you're what would the word be? A entrepreneurial generalist with an interest in multimedia.
Perfect.
Right.
Mm.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, with starting a business, that's very important to have. So your value on that front is very clear, I think. That you because you mentioned that you saw it as a stepping stone.
Yeah.
That implies that you didn't really have at least for me, it implies that you didn't really have a big business plan up front, but you made it evolve over time. Or would you say that you did have a clear plan on what you would want to achieve?
I had a rough idea. I won't say
Mm-hmm.
clear plan. I had a rough idea. I always knew that I want to evolve my company or my name or my brand into something which is doing a lot more than just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
I always had this in mind that I want to have like an umbrella of companies around me, which I am directly involved in.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it is an IT company, whether it is sports related, whether it is education related, I want to venture into a few things. And this was just the start. And I am not saying that once I ventured out of IT from my company, Shield Stallion, I'm not going to venture into IT again. I want to venture into IT again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something else related to IT, but it's more about what resonates me now. So that is the main goal, and that has always been the main goal, to have an umbrella of companies which I am part of, regardless of whether I started them or whether I came in and became part of the project.
Mm-hmm. And where's the focus coming from on the idea of having umbrella companies around you as opposed to having one single company that you found or that you become a partner in and building that from the ground? Where's the umbrella idea coming from?
The idea actually started a long time ago. One of my really old friend who basically taught me everything, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he was one of the owners of a company which was an umbrella corporation. So they were doing a lot of things, and watching him uh, and him teaching me about the business, about every single thing on how to run a business and what inspires him drive me towards this concept as well. And I feel like, like when you're growing up, you always have aspirations to become somebody, right? And that person was him for me. And
Mhm.
I always knew that, like I want to follow in his footsteps, probably like do a few different things differently, but the main goal, the main focus is to achieve that. And of course, like the level that he achieved is completely different. But even if I can reach like 1% of what he achieved, I would find myself successful.
Okay, but it still leaves the question: why the multiple companies as opposed to one?
It's an option. It's not necessary. It's an option.
Mhm.
The idea is to have an umbrella. It
Mhm.
could be just one company who is handling a few other companies, but it can also mean that there are multiple companies that I'm connected to, and then I become the top part of the umbrella. So the
Right. Okay.
idea is open.
Mhm. Mhm. So it could be like something like a holding structure where the holding has like a specific percentage of the shares of the companies that are falling under the holding, something like
Yeah,
that. Right.
yeah,
Okay.
it
Okay.
could be.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. And that's you mentioned that friend who taught you pretty much everything you know about this, at
Yeah.
least on this front.
Yeah.
You said he inspired you. What? Can you give me some examples of what inspired you? What did he share with you?
First of all, was his drive. He was so committed to what he wanted to do. Like when he has a goal in mind that he wants to do this,
Mm-hmm.
for sure he will achieve it. And it's very difficult for him. I mean, you can say this is the difference between me and him. I can get influenced very easily, but he cannot. He
Mm-hmm.
is very patient in determining what is his goal. He takes his time in figuring out what should be his goal. But once he has put a target on his goal, then his personality changes completely, and his focus is so determined towards achieving that goal
Mm-hmm.
that no matter what happens, that now his focus is just this. You can't change his mind, and he will achieve it.
Right. Yeah.
And that is something that I feel it's very rare in people. Whenever people face struggles in their goals, they often tend to deviate from it, including
Mm-hmm.
me. I'm not saying that I am any different from any other person, but that is something that I feel is something that needs to be developed, especially in children at younger age. And that is something that I feel I want to promote as well. Like children should be determined that once you have a goal, then you should be focused on it. Regardless of how difficult you feel like it is becoming, once you have a goal and you try to achieve it, there's no goal in your mind that you can't achieve if you have actually properly scrutinized the plan for it. And he
Mm-hmm.
only makes goals when he have a proper plan on how he wants to achieve that goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is very valuable to really think about what it is you want to achieve and then break it down to, okay, what do I need to do exactly in order to achieve that? And then break that down to the specific steps that you can then take in order to go for your goal. And that requires it requires vision, it requires focus, it requires, to use your word, drive. And it is a very useful skill to have. And those are the people that can make things happen, and often also relatively quickly. Um, I do think it is a skill that you can build, though. For some people, it might be coming more naturally than for others. That will be
Yeah.
fair to say. But it sounds to me like you're also trying to promote that within yourself. And my
Yeah.
question there would be, how do you try to set goals and really focus on them to make them happen without deviating or without changing your vision? But at the same time, how do you make sure that you can change if change is needed, so you're not stuck in your thinking pretty much?
Whenever you plan on any target, whenever you set a goal for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
if you're going in with the mentality that it can fail, it will fail. So that is very important to understand, that whenever you are recognizing a goal for yourself, don't think about that it will fail. Think about how you can make it successful, how you can reduce your risks, but never go into a mentality that it can fail. Because
Mindset.
once,
Yeah.
yeah, but because once this is in your mind that, like it might fail, then you're already looking for second option and third option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So this is a very important thing, I feel, in not just building goals for your job or your finances and whatnot, but also relationships. Because a lot of times when people get into relationships, they always have this fear that it will fail. And when you have this fear that it will fail, you're doubting yourself and you're doubting your partner. And it becomes very difficult for you to actually pursue that relationship because you have this fear in you.
Maybe that's one of the driving forces behind, and I'm making a jump here,
Yeah.
but maybe that's one of the driving forces behind the high divorce rates.
Yeah.
Because if you go into a marriage where usually you would have a holy vow, right? You vow that you will stay with each other for the rest of your lives, pretty much. But if you have in the back of your mind, like, okay, if it doesn't work out, we can just get a divorce. We'll sell our rings, and we'll live on our lives. If you go into that with that mindset, yeah, I think I agree with you. And then divorce down the line is almost a certainty because you're not all in on the choice that you make. You're predetermined to. Well, you're not predetermined, but you're leaving the door pretty wide open to get a divorce later on in your life.
Yeah. And this is another reason why I feel like um, it's a big issue, especially for me, when people take relationships, regardless of whatever kind of a relationship it is, whether it is with your partner or it could be with your family or friendship or anything, when they go with the purpose that it's okay, you know, nothing is okay. If you're serious about something, if you're serious about somebody, then it shouldn't be, it's okay to leave. It should never be okay to leave. If you want to be in a relationship, your driving force should be that what can I do to make it easier for my partner to stay with me? What can I do for my family to be with me in a happy way? You know, the the idea, the problem that I see in a lot of relationships is that people are more focused towards me, that I am having a problem. What about the other person? When you're only going to be thinking about me, then you should expect that your partner will be thinking about herself or himself as well. And that is when the problem comes, because nobody is willing to negotiate. Nobody is willing to actually come on table and discuss that, okay, it's not that you have a problem or I have a problem, we have a problem. So how do we solve this problem? Because problems will still be there. It's more about how do we solve this problem to make it easier for us and make our life better.
I had a wonderful conversation a couple of weeks ago with a really really impressive guy from the United States, Adam Ayala. That's episode 7. He's a psychoanalyst and he primarily specializes in human relationships. And one of the things that he said is that when he does couples therapy, one of the first questions that he asks in that process, which is a question that stops the conversation pretty much in its tracks, is something along, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's something along the lines of, is your partner happy? Have you considered if your partner is actually happy? And that's a parallel with what you're saying, because you're saying there's too big of a focus on me. What do I want? What do I need? But not what do we need to do together, or what can I do to improve the relationship that we have and bring it to the next level, and make it grow, make it better, make the partnership go to a higher level. So that's a really good point.
I think there was, I think a TikTok video or some podcast about this as well, in which somebody was asking a female, I think, the first question he asked was, is your partner happy? And
Mm-hmm.
and then she was quiet, and then she said that normally people ask, "How are you?" Not "How is my partner?" And then he asked again, uh, "But what is your answer? Is your partner happy?" And then she still didn't answer. And then he looked at the cameraman and said, "We got the answer right." And then she flipped.
Pretty much. Yeah.
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 Yep.
And the second thing I will say about that is, and once again to the marriage thing, um, if you take a holy vow, and it's not called a holy vow without a reason. It's that because it should be eternal. It should be absolute. There should not be doubt. That's why it's an eternal vow. So if you make an eternal vow and you break it later on in your life, how can you trust yourself in the future? Because clearly you can't keep to your own promises. So it compromises your own spirit. It compromises your own integrity. It breaks so much more than just the marriage itself. You break your own spirit, I suppose.
Yeah. And the main thing is that it creates distrust in yourself, right?
Yes.
You can't trust yourself. And of course, when you don't trust yourself, that is the when the problem comes and you start not
Mm-hmm.
trusting people around you. And it's just a cycle. And when this comes,
Mm-hmm.
when you have children, if you have children, that is the same ideology you'll be throwing at them. And that is why a lot of children who are unable to have a fulfilling and happy marriage are the people who are coming from broken families, people whose parents have been divorced, or they have a bad, you can say, like a relationship within their family. And it bottles down to them as well, so it
Mm-hmm.
follows through from parents to children, and the cycle continues.
Yeah, 100%. All right, I'm going to take a step back.
Sure.
So that question about what inspired you about your friend, your first answer was his drive, his spirit, and his perseverance in order to move forward towards his goal.
Yeah.
Are there some other things that he inspired you with?
To be honest, his whole personality was amazing. First of all, like after his drive and whatnot, he was very honest with himself. And I feel like this is very, very important trait for a person to have. When you're honest with yourself, you are willing to accept what is wrong in yourself. And when you're willing to accept that there is a problem in you, then only you can work on improving yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't even accept that there is a mistake that you're doing or you're doing something wrong, how are you going to fix it? It doesn't make sense, right? So that is something that I feel, and that is something that I have adopted, and I feel very content about it. That most of the time, not all the time, of course, but most of the time, when someone criticizes me for something that I'm doing wrong, I'm willing to listen. I um, am trying, or I have tried to calm myself in listening to what other person is trying to say about me. Of course, a lot of times things can be a little bit more sensitive, and maybe you need a little bit more time to process it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the end game. Like I feel if I am able to, on the spot, calm my nerves when I'm listening to somebody who is uh, criticizing me on probably a very emotional matter, that is something which is my end goal to achieve. Because I know, like, you can say, like, 95% of the time, I am calm when somebody criticizes me. But there's this 5%, right? When somebody criticizes you about something which you really, really admire about yourself, and somebody just bursts your bubbles, and you know that this person is right. And to keep yourself, maybe don't respond at that time. This has happened to me, like when I have calmed myself enough to not respond at the time, but to be more, um, like proactive in calming myself, and not just listen to the person, but even proactively question the person that, okay, please help me understand that. That is something that I feel I'm lacking on those 5% of the time. 95% of the time, yes. But that is something that I really admire about him. And that is something that he has taught me. There are a lot of qualities of this person that I could actually, I mean, we would have to do a whole podcast about him because I really admire him. And, like when you admire somebody who you are really close to, who you have actually lived among and you have spent so much time with, there's so much you can say about that person. So I would just say these two things for now.
Do you still have contact with him today?
No, he passed away.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So that company, that IT company that you started,
Yes.
was Shoe Stallion.
Yes.
That was the original one, and I believe it still exists today, right?
Yes, it does. But it is not active at the moment because since I moved out of Malaysia, I have ceased all operations which were associated with that because I wanted to move out of Malaysia completely. So most of its operations have been ceased now.
Okay. And where did that idea come from to move out of Malaysia? So can you take me from the moment that you were running the company pretty much to what happened after that? So how does the timeline generally look?
Okay, so we started the company in 2014. Yeah. So and at that point we started with an IT company. We ventured into small investments as well with investing in small projects, which were short projects, as in like 6 months project, and then you just close them up. So those are the projects which you work with other companies and they take the job, and then you work with them to complete the job. It could be IT related. It could be with armed forces, like government projects and whatnot. So those are like small projects. When I say armed forces, doesn't really mean that you're working in armament and whatnot, but those are projects which are through armed forces, but those are social projects. Like, for example, maybe building a school, building playgrounds, things like this. These are smaller social projects which are created by armed forces or government departments, but they work on social side of the country. Yeah. So we took a few of those projects with a few other companies, combined together and did those projects. And after that, I actually started a recording studio, and that was my first proper investment, which was solely run by me. So it was my own project. I built my whole recording studio from scratch. Did a good investment, especially because at that time I didn't knew how to play a single instrument. I was not a musician myself, but because a couple of my friends, they were musicians, and I used to hang around with a lot of musicians, it just became an inspiration, and I felt like I wanted to do something for them because I'm spending so much time with them, and I felt like there is a market for it. I was looking at it from a business point of view as well, but at the same time, I felt that there is something missing. And the thing which was missing that I felt was community. I felt like there are a few different communities and they are all segregated, right? And I wanted to bring them together. I wanted to bring a place where, regardless of which community you are from, you can come in. And that was the main idea. And when we built up, it was doing fairly well, I would say, considering that I didn't had any background from music, but I was looking at solely from the point of view of business. After a couple of years, I decided that, we've reached a stage where it is a little bit stagnant in terms of finances. And that is something where I feel as a businessman, you need to make a decision. If you continue, then you need to bring a lot of changes. And if you maybe it could be for any reason. maybe you don't have an interest in this anymore, or it could be you don't have the finances for it, or it could be maybe you don't have any other idea, new ideas to bring in to like change the diagram of the company. So when that happens, and when that happened for me, I needed to make a decision, and decided that like maybe it's time for me to sell the business, because it was fairly good business, but it would be better in the hands of somebody who is actually a musician himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of my close friends, he had his own studio as well, but his studio was rather small, and he wanted to venture into my area where my studio was located. So it was like a win-win situation. And then he came in and he bought the place. Initially, we were partners. We remained partners. Like, I still had a stake in the company for almost 1.5 years, even after selling it. And after 1.5 years, we completely sold it off. And that is when I ventured into F&B. And that is when I started to invest in restaurants. So initially, we started from one restaurant, which was built from scratch between me and a couple of my friends. We were, I believe, at that point, 5 partners, of which 3 were main partners and 2 side partners. And then with the same company, the next year we opened another restaurant as well. So every year we started to build a few restaurants, and while I was working with them, we had 3 restaurants under our belt at that time before I left Malaysia. And with another person, I also started 3 more restaurants. I mean, their restaurants were already there. I just invested, and I was just like a silent partner with them.
Right. But it's quite a jump. How did you make the decision to go from the music industry with your studios to getting involved in the food industry?
Short answer, impulse. So yeah, I mean, that's the easiest answer I can give you. But all in all, I feel like, and this is why I was discussing with you before we started the recording, that
Mhm.
I feel like saying that it's all because of my parents is not a wrong thing to say, because I knew that regardless of whether I will be successful or I will fail, I knew at my back my parents will be there, who will support me, not just emotionally, not by saying that, oh, we are proud of you, but I knew that financially my father will be behind my back. And I knew, like, if anything happens, he will be there to support me. And I knew that, like, regardless of what happens, because of my father, I will be able to maintain my lifestyle, which is very important, right? And a lot of people think that, like, okay, when they fall back and if they have a back, maybe they will be surviving on their back. This was not the case for me. I knew that if I fall back, my father has worked hard enough for me to have a good lifestyle, even if I fall. And that was really important for me. And while I was running my companies, I was also taking in interns. And the main purpose of taking interns was to actually help them grow and understand themselves. And this was one of the things that I always teach my interns and my students. Even now, I take one student every year as a pro bono. And sometimes I also give career advices to students. And this is one of the main things that I always teach my students. You should know what you can fall on. If you don't know what you can fall on, you cannot make decisions for your future, because you will always be afraid of failing. For me, I was able to take the risk, and the type of risk that I was able to take was because I knew that how much I can fail, that my father will catch me. And that is a very, very important thing for any student or anybody who's progressing. If I didn't believe in my father, I would never be able to take such risk. And that is the core of any decision that I make.
What advice would you give to someone who doesn't have that foundation to fall back on and still wants
Find
to
your
get started?
fallback. it doesn't mean that, like, okay, maybe somebody doesn't have parents like my parents, but what can you fall back on? You need to recognize this. Otherwise, you cannot take any risk. If you don't have anybody who can support you, then build something on which you can fall on before you take any risk. For example, let's say if you are a student right now, you don't have good financial backing from your parents, there are always education centers who are teaching you something for free. Why do you need to graduate right now when your parents can't afford education, when you can take some courses which are out there for free, which can help you develop your skills so that you can be financially capable of handling yourself? So these are the decisions that you need to make for yourself when you are actually trying to make decisions for yourself. If your family doesn't have money, what can they provide you? Can they provide you with time? Will you have time on your own? Because if you don't have time for yourself, then there is no way you can actually develop yourself. So the only thing you can do is support your family. And how you will support your family, that's something that you need to decide. What can you do actually? What are your skills? What are your connections? Who can help you with what? So there are 101 questions you need to ask before making this decision that, okay, now I'm ready to make an investment or maybe make a decision which is going to completely change my life. Because whenever you make decisions like this, like opening a business or maybe even studying, it's a decision which requires expense. And if you don't have that expense, how can you study? Then you try to find resources which are maybe going to give you scholarships, or maybe you want to take courses which are free courses. So these are all decisions.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in what you're saying, and there's definitely a lot of truth in it as well. I think generally speaking, for people that want to get started with their own business and that, for example, have a 9 to 5 job, and that's the thing, right? Having a 9 to 5 job means that you have a weekly or a monthly fixed income that you can live on, and that provides you with a sense of safety. It's something to fall back on. So let's assume that there's no financial backing from any family members, right? You are in this yourself. You have your 9 to 5 job and you want to get started. Well, obviously you can go the route of canceling your 9 to 5 job and all of a sudden 100% focus on starting a business. Might be quite risky. It will likely be very risky because, if it fails, because that can happen, now you don't have a 9 to 5 job anymore that you can fall back on. So that's gonna be a rough one. But what you can do, like you said, is ask yourself the questions. What can you do right now? With the time that you have, there's more than enough resources, both paid and free, that can be used. There's a lot of platforms on the internet, for example, that just cost a couple of €100 a year, or a couple of $100 a year, that provide a huge amount of benefit. And that knowledge you can take to build your company slowly, to get people on board with it, to get your first couple of clients, and to just let it grow organically. There's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of different ways you can approach that.
Yeah. Also, I want to add one thing, how you mentioned that if when you are deciding on, leaving your 9 to 5 job and starting a business, one of the questions that you should always ask yourself is, the business that you're going to be starting, is it going to pay you monthly? Because not all businesses will give you enough money that you can actually sustain monthly, because you still have bills to pay, you still have to eat. So if you are not going to organize your finances while starting a business, it could be a train wreck for you. Because a lot of businesses, you will only start seeing some money after 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, at least in restaurant business, it can be even longer, since there's a huge upfront payment that you have to make in order to get it started. It can take years.
Yep.
Yeah. And in the meantime, you also have to pay salaries of everybody who's working for the restaurant, so that you can imagine that that's quite a bit of financial. What would the word be?
Insecurity, stress.
Yeah, let's go with that. It requires quite a bit of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the taxes and
Oh
maybe
yeah.
the rent and expense. If you have a restaurant, then you have the cost of raw material and whatnot. So there are 101 things that you need to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in my personal experience, I've started a couple of businesses in my lifetime, but I never went the route of stopping my 9 to 5 job and just 100% focusing on starting the business. I've always done it on the side, so I've always let it grow organically. So my first one, I think I started literally on my 18th birthday. That was a journalistic company back in the day. Which lasted for around 3 to 4 years, and it like you said, it just didn't bring enough money in the drawer. So at some point, it just didn't make any sense to continue it. So that's why I canceled that back then. And a year ago, I started a consultancy company together with a partner, also primarily within IT. But I'm doing that next to my current job. So that's for me my foundation to fall back on. It requires extra time because, of course, I mean, I don't really care about 9 to 5 jobs to begin with. So I don't really care about making 40 hours a week to begin with. If it's 60 hours or 70 hours in a week, that's perfectly fine with me. I'm not the guy that complains about that. But it is very important to realize that requires more time of you. You will not, you can't expect to work 30 hours in a week and have your job plus your business growing. That's not how it works.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Mm-hmm. I do have an interesting question for you though, because regarding the whole scope of type of businesses that you've engaged in, because once again, you went to the restaurant business, you were active in IT, and later on also in sports and in media. It's very diverse.
Yeah.
How do you identify whether something is a genuine opportunity or a risky venture that you should better avoid?
First of all, the question, and this is solely for me. Other people could have different reasons, different opinions about why they choose anything, any project. For me, one of the most important question is, how much would I be involved in the project? If I don't find that the project needs me, then I feel like it is waste of my time. And to be honest, like I mentioned before, because of my parents, I'm quite lucky. I feel that I don't want to work for money. I want to work for myself. I want to work in an environment, in projects where I feel like I can actually give something. If I'm not developing something, then I feel like I'm not developing myself. If I am
Right.
sitting in a seat and just playing games at my computer when I'm at office, I feel like I'd rather do that at home. And that is where I feel like I am wasting my energy, my time, sitting in a place, taking money without being productive. And that is something that I don't want. So this is how I choose.
And why do you think that is? Because, and I understand you. Let me be very upfront about that. I think I understand perfectly why you're saying this, and I think you and I are very alike in this case. But I'm still going to ask you the devil's advocate question.
Yeah.
Because you could also make the other. What I often hear, and I don't understand that mindset, but I'm curious what you think about this. What I often hear from people that generally work 9 to 5 jobs is, who cares if I don't have to work 40 hours? As long as I get my salary at the end of the month or at the end of the week, that's fine, right? What do you think about that? What do you make of that?
I feel it's okay for somebody who doesn't want to personally grow, right? Because it could be for any reasons. And I'll be very diplomatic about it, about answering this question, because a lot of people have their issues. When I say issues, I mean like they could have family problems. that they need money. So if I know that my family is relying on 9 to 5 jobs salary, I don't want to risk it.
Mhm.
Even if I'm in a position where I'm just sitting on the table and doing bare minimum, just typing in random things, and I will get that salary, that's a safety net that my family needs right now. But for somebody who doesn't need that money, who probably has bigger goals in mind, he will probably disagree with the statement and would want to pursue something which will help him develop or achieve goals that he wants to achieve for himself.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. So if I would ask you the question, what do you find meaningful? Then your answer will be personal growth and becoming
Yes.
better both for myself and for my community.
Yes. And personal growth never ends.
Mhm.
When you achieve one target, once you have achieved one growth which you were looking for in your personal growth, then you need to develop other goals. And that is why you see me going from a very different entrepreneurship, from IT to music to F&B to education to sports, because I have personal targets. When I have personal targets, that's my personal growth. And that is where I am just moving around in different subjects.
Mhm. Mhm. One last question about the entrepreneurial side
Sure.
of the story. How do you prepare yourself to deal with competition in the various industries?
That's a very interesting question. First of all, you need to trust in your partners. Especially with me, I'm just solely talking about myself, because most of the projects which I ventured into, I had
Mhm.
partners, except for maybe a couple of them. And when you have partners, you need to realize what is everybody bringing on the table. When we started our F&B industry, two of my main partners, which I mentioned, like we were three main partners, right? So
Mhm.
two of them, one of them was MC in clubs. So we knew that marketing is settled. He's going to drive the crowd to our place, right? Second thing, my second partner, he has been running F&B restaurants for more than a decade. So he was 100% sure that he can handle the operation side of the business easily. So when you cover these two things, we were 100% sure that we will make this successful if we play our cards right. And that is what happened. It is very, very difficult for any restaurant to start on year zero, and the next year they are opening another branch from the money that they have actually generated from the revenue from the first outlet. It is
Mhm.
close to impossible, and we did it. From year one to year two, we opened a new branch. Year two to year three, we opened another branch. All from the money circulated from the restaurant that we started on day one. So it was very important for us to trust each other's skills. And that is very important in covering your competition, because you have somebody who has experience in something. I would never have taken the risk if I knew that none of my partners are capable of marketing, because it's F&B industry, right? In F&B
Mhm.
industry, if you don't market, you will fail.
Mhm.
If your operations are not good, you will fail. If on the spot or at the ground, your operations people are not handling any situation properly, you will fail. Quality control is so important. So
Mhm.
your operations person needs to be top notch. If your operations person cannot handle the food quality, he cannot handle the situations which are happening on the ground. If your finance person cannot handle finances, you will fail. So having a team around you which have skill sets is very important. If you're starting a solo business, your own business, you need to recognize what are your capabilities. What can you do? If you don't even know what you can do, you will fail. And that is what happens with a lot of companies, a lot of products. The person just knows how to make a product. That's about it. He doesn't know how to market his product. He doesn't know how to run his company. He doesn't know how to manage his staff. It fails. So if you cannot manage your company, hire somebody who can manage your company. If you cannot market your product yourself, hire somebody who can market your product. So if you're not going to achieve that, you will never be successful. There will always be competition, but you can only stay in the competition. You will only be relevant in the competition if you have a team around you who will be able to compete with the competition. So this is what I can say.
Yeah, so your focus was primarily on building the restaurant, making sure that you have the right people on the right positions, and that there was a level of quality control across the board to make sure that every single cog in the wheel pretty much works well, and everybody knows what their roles, everybody knows what to do. And at the same time, the quality of the end result of the food and the service for the clients was maintained or was on a good level.
Yeah.
How do you, so maybe because this requires, because I think what you're saying, you manage it yourself. How do you make sure that you build that team? Can you give some practical tips on how you selected the proper people, how you put them on the proper place, and how you made sure that quality control across the board was maintained? What are some things that you can say about that?
Okay. I didn't build it myself. Like I mentioned to you before, I actually choose the projects which I want to be part of. So
Right.
some of the companies, yes, some of the projects, yes, I started myself, and then I tried to find people who could actually help me run the project. Like the music studio was my game. It was my baby that I started from scratch. So for that, I needed people who will do certain things for me, right? So in that way, yes, the restaurant was not my idea, but I ventured into it because it resonated with me. I liked the idea. I liked the people who I was working for, and we had a level of trust between us at that point. And that is the reason why we were successful at first. And this is very important to understand that the trust needs to be consistent. When you start to lose trust in yourself or people you're working with, things will start to fall. And that is what happened in a few of my businesses as well. I sold some of my businesses because the level of trust between us was fading. And I'm not going to say that, we had fights or something. Every business, you will have fights, you will have arguments. And I'm still friends with all of them. We ended in a good note, I would say, at least from my part. But you cannot continue the business, you cannot continue your partnership when the level of trust starts to diminish. And that is really important to recognize at a very early stage so that you don't go to a point where you can't leave in a happy note.
What are some of the things that you did in order to maintain or even build the trust within the companies?
Trust cannot be built by one person. It's always a team game. If from my side, I can only say that the most important thing to build a trust is transparency. If your decisions are not transparent, then people around you will start doubting you. And the reason why it's very important is because everybody, when you're working with somebody, regardless of whether it's business or it's something else, when people are relying on you, they are going to judge you. They are going to judge the decisions that you make, the work that you do, And if they feel that you are not being honest with the project, they will start doubting you.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes your partners, or your employees, or anybody, or maybe even your clients, if they have a stake in the project, then they will be evaluating you, regardless of whether you tell them or not, whether they say it to you or not. But everybody who have a stake in anything evaluates every single person who is part of the project.
Mm-hmm.
And if they feel like somebody is not being honest with the project, or somebody is not being honest with the members of the project or the stakeholders of the project, the level of distrust will start to grow. And when it reaches a boiling point, that is where the problem comes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When you're noticing that trust is diminishing, which can
Yes.
happen, which can happen all the time, right?
Yes.
I agree with your point
Always.
of transparency. I fully 100% agree with that. But there might, we are all humans, we can make mistakes, and sometimes we make a decision without thinking about who it impacts, or not communicating it, or we are making the decision based on our own thoughts instead of the feedback of the people around us. So it can happen. So the
Yeah.
moment that you are noticing that trust is diminishing because something like this, what do you do to tackle it, to prevent it from going down even further?
First of all, when you start to realize that maybe it was your mistake, you need to be honest with everybody who is a stakeholder. Even though you are a partner, maybe you are an owner and other people are your employees. But if you're not going to accept your mistake, they will not trust you.
Mm-hmm.
But when you actually accept your mistake, then it is different, because people start trusting you more, because they believe that, okay, at least my CEO or the director is capable of accepting a mistake and he wants to fix it. Because in the end, we all have a stake in company. And when everybody has a stake in company, then things need to go right. And that is the most important thing. And I feel like accepting your mistake and trying to evaluate how you can actually fix everything, that is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And people will help you. I believe when anybody who is honest in the company, whether it's an employee or the owner of the company, if anybody accepts their mistake and they want to rectify it, people who have a stake in the project will help you, as long as everybody is honest.
Mm-hmm.
There's a saying that one bad fish spoils the whole pond, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Very
it's the
true.
same thing. So if even one person is not honest, it can spoil the whole project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This reminds me, everything that you're saying reminds me about what Jocko Willink said in his book Extreme Ownership. And he's an ex-Navy SEAL, so he lays it out in a very military style, but pretty much the argument that he's making, and I'm paraphrasing here, is why would you trust a leader that is shifting blame, that cannot take responsibility, who is pointing his fingers to others, whether they are peers or subordinates or whatever? Why would you trust a person like that? You can't, because the person clearly can't take responsibility for its own mistakes. Because at the end of the day, a person in a leadership position, he's responsible. At the end of the day, that's how it works.
Yeah.
So if you have a leader in front of you, and it doesn't matter what the problem is, it might be that there is a let's say you're working for an IT company that builds software and a wrong build went out, so now the application in the iPhone store is broken, it doesn't work anymore, something like that. It's very easy to say, okay, the testers messed up, or the programmers, they messed up, it's their fault, they should be punished for it. But wait a second, hold on, there's a leader at the top of the helm. And the leader is responsible for making sure that the company runs well. And clearly, it was clearly because of the mechanisms within the company, it allows that mistake to happen. So the best thing that can happen in that situation is not, the programmers messed up and they should be reprehended. No, the leader should step up and say, guys, we messed up. This is because this is clearly, there's clearly something within this company that's allowing that to happen. And at the end of the day, I am responsible for that. So I'll take the blame for that. And these are the things I will do to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. Because clearly what happened right now impacts you all. And the feedback that we are getting from our clients or from our users and the angry reviews that we're getting, it hurts you because you put your blood, sweat and tears in this product. This is a mess up that I made, and this is what I'm going to do to prevent this from happening. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Taking the blame, give credit, give your team all the credit, take all the blame, and making sure that you don't just repeat the same mistake over and over again, because you can be very transparent if you make the same mistake 10 times, but then nobody's going to take you serious anymore. So actually also, make sure that you improve and have a clear plan on how to move forward. But those things, I think, builds trust, and that's what your story is reminding me of. Clearly, you have a very similar approach to that.
Yeah, I think it's very important to create an environment where people can actually be honest, because it's very important to have a distinction between the hierarchy, but at the same time, it's very important to create an environment where people's opinions can actually flow. If there is a restriction in the flow of ideas, if there is a restriction in the flow of acceptance in faults, the environment itself becomes toxic enough that things will not work. And the reason why I'm saying this is because sometimes it is important that the ownership or the top of the food chain doesn't accept a random fault, because it's not always that like the ownership is at fault, or maybe the CEOs or the top management is at fault. Sometimes the blame, it should go towards the team, but the environment should be inviting enough that whoever's fault it is easy to confront them. It shouldn't be that, like when you're trying to confront somebody for their mistake, they are, leaning towards the wall, that in this desperation that, oh, it's not my fault. The environment should be inviting enough that if somebody made a mistake, they should be open to coming out and say that, okay, it was a mistake, it happened, now what can we do? Because in the end, the end goal should be how can we fix a problem, instead of just running around, start blaming everybody, right? So you should always be focused on what is the end goal. And the end goal is how to solve the problem and how you can make the project successful. That's the end goal, regardless of whoever made the mistake.
Yeah, and this is also where your early comment comes in. There might be a case where you have a bad apple within the team who doesn't pull their weight consistently.
Yeah.
Then you have that, and then it's time to let that go. But once again, you are the person in a leadership position. You are the person responsible to make that call. Everybody can improve. Everybody can be transparent with each other. And I fully agree with you. A good team that's honestly inspired by the vision of the goal that's being set by the leadership, that's gigantically powerful. And especially if you make them part of the solution, part of the goal, And this is also where your free flow of ideas comes from, I think. Yeah. But if you have people that clearly oppose that, or even worse, actively work against it, yeah, for sure. Then there's a clear mismatch that you need to make a hard decision for, and maybe the decision is not so hard at all. It depends on the situation, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Beautiful. Moving on. You're currently involved in career development for fresh graduates. So I'm making a jump here. But what was the catalyst that led you to shift focus from business development to mentoring young professionals? And how did you make that transition, practically speaking?
I always had a vision of working with people who are trying to develop themselves.
Hmm.
And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to make this decision. And also, it is important to understand that I'm not going to take any random student. Like if somebody comes to me and says that, like, okay, uh, can they work in my company as an intern or something like that? I will probably not give them a chance. I want
Hmm.
to handpick people because there's a priority in my mind. I want to work with people who don't just want to work as an intern for the sake of just graduating. They have a bigger purpose in mind. They want to develop themselves to do something special. If somebody have a goal, and this is one of the reasons why whenever I interview somebody for an internship position, my first question is, what do you want to do in the next 5 to 10 years? If they don't have a goal in their mind, and I don't want a random answer that, like, oh, I want to graduate from this so I can work in this industry. No, not that. I want a more, um, you can say, like a broader answer, which is defining that, like, what do you want to be in future?
A vision.
Yeah, a vision. Like, what is your vision of what do you see yourself being in the next 10 years, 20 years? What do you want to
Hmm.
achieve? Do you have like a goal in mind that, like, oh, I want to become the first person to do this, or I want to be somebody who want to make this many this is something which is much more quantitative, something which you can visualize, something which is very specific. So that is something that I'm looking for, and that is the reason why I choose who I want to guide, whether it's an intern or sometimes when I do mentorship. So the people who I'm going to be choosing, regardless of what age it is, it's easier to work with kids who are fresh graduates or not because they have time to prepare, right? But I do take mentorships for people who are older than me as well, somebody who is struggling. But those cases are a little bit different because they are coming with a lot of baggage, and baggage that it's very difficult to change because their personality has developed over time to a stage where it is very difficult for them to change their psychology. But kids who are fresh graduates or even earlier than that, like I mentored somebody who was 13 years old, 14 years old. Uh, that kid, I mentored him for almost 5, 6 years, and he's doing really well. He's more successful than me. So I find that
That's beautiful.
yeah, and I find this a success for me. Uh,
Hmm.
my, like I want to tell one of a very short story.
Hmm.
I always had this vision in my mind that I would feel successful when at least one person will call me and tell me that, I am where I am because of you. And that will be the happiest day of my life. When I was in Malaysia, when I opened my recording studio, I took one intern, and didn't even graduate at that time when he was my student. He was in his third grade, I think, third year or second year. Um, and he worked with me for almost 1 year plus. He wasn't even studying music. What he was working with me on was completely solely music. His education was completely different. But and he had an issue that, like before he could even graduate, he had to leave. He wasn't even in Malaysia for his graduation because of his financial situations. But after his graduation, once he moved to USA, he settled down over there. Once he graduated, he called me on video call, and then he even dedicated his degree to me. and he video called me, and he was sharing that, like, you are one of the reasons why I graduated. And at that point, I was crying, because it was like I was such a small part of his education. Like, I didn't even like I would say that I wasn't even part of his education, but whatever he was saying, I felt that, like, I hold meaning in his life. So that was something that I always wanted. And of course, like, when once it happens, it encourages you that, like, okay, you are on the right path. And then I wanted to do more and more cases like that.
Yeah, that's an absolute wonderful reaction. And clearly, it also meant a lot for you because it instantly brought you mentally to your knees. Hearing that,
Yeah.
how is he doing right now?
Now he's very successful, I would say. I mean, he is he's settled. He has a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very, very happy with him. Like, he has really settled himself in USA now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm still very interested in this handpicking process.
Yeah.
Let me know if I'm getting in the right direction. It sounds to me like what you don't just want to hear a pretty story, right? That someone the day before studied with themselves 10 times in the mirror. You want to be you want to hear a vision. You want to be inspired. You want to understand why the person is looking for an internship at one of your companies. There needs to be a reason, and that reason needs to fit within the broader goal that the person has set for themselves, which is what you're trying to get at with your 5 to 10 year question. In the beginning, you mentioned that you are easily inspired. So a risk that I see there is that someone with a pretty story is able to bypass that question and then get his internship without actually having a vision. How do you prevent that from happening? How do you make sure that the person that you are hiring for the internship is, yeah, to, for lack of better words, legitimate what you're looking for?
He would probably be able to get in with fancy words,
Mm-hmm.
but would he be able to sustain it? That's a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So for me, giving internship to somebody, it's not a risk. Even if I make a mistake, it's fine for me. You can get into my company for internship with fancy words, is fine. But I will never mentor somebody who I don't see the drive in.
Yeah, or you don't
And
believe in.
yeah, and it's not just a belief. Like, there are a lot of people who have goals in mind, and um, they're probably determined also. They have every single thing very specific in mind, and you would say that, like, okay, they are the ideal person to give internship to. But then I need to ask myself this question as well: what am I giving this kid? If the person has
Mm-hmm.
already uh, every single thing, all the steps are already aligned, he knows what he wants in every single thing, then I'm not giving him anything.
Mm-hmm.
If being in under my presence is not going to help anyone, then what is the point? You get what I mean? So
Yeah.
I want to pick somebody who has a vision in mind, but he needs me to materialize that vision. So, regardless of whether it is assisting him in getting connections, it could be assisting him in personal growth, it could be giving him the direction that how he can achieve his goals. But if the person doesn't need me, if he doesn't need my direction, then there is no point in giving somebody an opportunity for me to mentor him, because it's not an opportunity then anymore. So for me, I want to give opportunity to somebody who I can actually help develop. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to go straight to the next topic because I know you're a bit strapped on time and we have maximum around 20-25 minutes left. So let's go towards the relationship between men and women in society, because I know that is a topic that you spoke quite passionately about.
Yes.
How do you see the relationship between men and women right now in society, and what do you think is currently broken, and what can be done to fix it?
I will start with the problem first. I
Mhm.
feel like in the society right now, most of the YouTube, TikTok, when you pick up, the biggest problem is we are trying to compete. Men are saying we are better than women. Women are saying we are better than men. There are talks going on about like women are saying that they don't need men. Men are saying that when you don't need me, then you're destroying the society and things like this. There are 101 things that people are saying, and it is always about like men versus women. And this is my problem. I feel like we are creating a distance between us because we are seeing each other as a competition. Whenever you see each other as a competition, you always want to win. And nobody is a winner in this situation, because when you create a competition between two people, you are segregating them. And how will you win when you are living in the same society and you are segregated? And that is what is happening all over the world. Like um, how we mentioned before the podcast started about the divorce rate, we discussed about how people are not happy in their relationships. And it's all because of this competition. We are trying to discuss about what is each other's role in a more you can say like a harsh way, because like whenever we are discussing about getting married, we are discussing like, okay, woman should do this because it's a woman's role, men should do this because it's men's role. And this is creating more separation between us, because before you even born, before you even come into a harmonious relationship, you are straight away, your discussion is what one person needs to do. Instead, I feel like we should be discussing, okay, now we are getting into a marriage. This is how our life should be. These are the things that we should be doing to have a successful, happy marriage. For we should be discussing in general that, okay, in a marriage, what are the things that needs to be done? For example, okay, you will have kids. So how do we raise kids? It should never be like how you will raise kids. It should always be about how we raise kids.
Mhm.
What kind of education do you want to give them? Okay, so if you want to give them a good education, then you need this much budget. How are we going to manage this much money? And you can dial it down to smaller things that, okay, so your work is, let's say, a 9 to 5 job, and then can I manage more time? How do we give more time to our children? How do we create some sort of rules for our families that is going to help have a better family system? So there's so many things where we are just competing with each other. We keep on saying that, like, okay, so if a woman should cook the food, men should bring all the money on the table. And then we are also discussing that, okay, men's money is family money, but the wife's money is just wife's money. So we are talking about things like this, which are creating more differences rather than talking about things which bring value to the family system. So this is where I came in, and I wanted to create a different mindset. I wanted people to actually recognize that we should be focusing on the problem not the creating more problems, but to solve the problems which we are going to be inheriting. And when I say inheriting, I mean that when you start a family, you inherit problems, and your problems are going to be things, could be things like, okay, now you have to manage each other's time. So that is a problem that you inherited, right? Because your wife will have her own schedule, you will
Mhm.
have your own schedule. So when you come together, then you need to manage your time, because a marriage where husband and wife are not spending time together, it's not a marriage. It's a, you can say, like a commitment, like an official commitment that you're doing.
Mhm.
So how this is an inherited problem. So when you inherit this problem, how are you going to solve this? How are you going to make, and of course, when you marry, maybe some people can say that the reason why they got married is because they wanted to have kids. Fine. But your partner is still an important part of that, right? So you choose your partner who is going to help you have kids that you want to raise with an image that you desire. So when you choose that, you want to choose a partner who you can actually communicate properly. And to communicate with your partner properly, you want her to feel wanted. If she doesn't feel that her partner wants her, then I don't think that the relationship will be good.
Mhm. Yeah, so your points primarily, and let me know if I got this correct.
Sure.
Your point is primarily that we should focus on the unity of marriage and create local solutions to the family itself, so that we within the family can figure out what we need to do in order to make the family work, and how you deal with challenges like raising children, bringing in money, and doing other things that are important to the family, instead of having a discussion on a global level about what the universal roles of men and women are.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying pretty much.
Perfect. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. It makes a lot of sense. You have a lot more. One of the questions you can ask yourself when dealing with issues in general is, what do you have control over? And if I ask you the question, do you have control over the world? Bit of an extreme question, but the answer is likely no.
Yeah.
So the point that I'm trying to make there is, trying to influence what the universal role of men and women should be in the world is probably not the best way forward, both
Yeah.
practically and probably also morally, but that's a separate story. My point is, what you do have control over, to some degree at least, is what happens in your family. So this is also where I think the beauty in your answer comes forward. Every relationship is different. Every,
Yeah.
your temperament is your personalities are different. Your history is different. Your experience is different. Your culture is different. Everything is different. So that per definition almost means that every relationship is different. So you should find with your partner the proper balance within your relationship that is needed to not only maintain it, but let it flourish.
I completely agree with you. You know, maybe it would sound a little bit cheesy, but I'm sort of a person who's, you can say, like a hopeless romantic. So, so
You and me
I,
both.
yeah, I have a very strong belief that um, if I treat my partner in a way that she is the one for me,
Mhm,
that's it, period.
mhm,
Regardless of whatever the problem is, if there is a problem, I don't care whether she did anything wrong or I did anything wrong. I just don't want to see tears in her eyes.
mhm,
That's about it, right?
mhm,
When you go with that mentality, right? When there is a problem, you don't want to see like who made a mistake. You want to solve the problem. And that is the only reason why you do this is because you don't want to see tears in your partner's eyes. You don't want to see your partner stressed out about something. And when that happens, and even if your partner is also doing the same thing, then I don't think that you will be distinguishing about what are men's role or what are women's role. You won't be fussy about what are the general perspective of the world on the gender roles, because the roles don't mean anything when the priority is your partner.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that I feel like is one of the most important things how you can be happy.
Do you think there's still a reason or a benefit for that societal question about what the roles of men and women are? Is there still a place for that discussion? And if yes,
Probably,
what is it?
but the thing is, you see, everything makes sense due time. At the moment, I feel there are bigger issues in hand. At the moment, I feel like our societies are changing, evolving so rapidly that discussing about things like gender role, especially when the society is too sensitive about it, it's better to talk about individualistic roles or individualistic situations rather than gender roles as a world point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when we talk about gender roles in terms of worldview, you can never have one right answer, because we, as in this whole world, we are living in multitudes of cultures. And now, because of the social media and everything, we are introduced by so many different cultures that we are competing between cultures. We are always, instead of just talking about gender roles, we are also talking about this culture is doing wrong, this religion is doing wrong, this any other demography is doing wrong. Rather than, okay, we started off from gender roles, now we're talking about gender roles or gender equality in different races, different cultures, different religions, and whatnot. So we're just it links up so many things, and when you start blaming one thing, one person or one demography, those demography will say that no, we are right, you're wrong. So who is right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like when you are in Rome, do as Romans do, right? So if I am in Europe and they have a certain culture to follow in society, while I'm in society, I need to respect that. I can't go to, let's say, like in your country and start saying that, no, in my country, we do things differently. So you should start following my rules. It won't work, because majority of people who are in your country do things a specific way. But
Mm-hmm.
what I can do is, while in my own house, I can adopt whatever I feel is right for me.
Mm-hmm.
But when in society, how am I supposed to compare myself with other people when I don't even know their culture? Probably, like, maybe if I watch 10 videos about your culture, I will not know your culture
Mm-hmm.
as deeply as you know your culture, because you lived in your culture, you were brought up in your culture. Probably you have seen various aspects of your culture much more deeply than I have.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when we are talking about certain topics, we just see it from one perspective. And those perspectives are the perspectives that we want to actually know, maybe, or maybe we want to highlight. But we don't know the whole story. We don't know that all the variables which are affecting those decisions. So it is very difficult for us to actually talk about worldview of gender roles, especially in now this society right now, because everything is all over social media. You say one wrong thing right now, 10,000 people who are from a completely different culture, completely different background, who won't even understand your context, will be criticizing you.
Yeah, and that's a very dangerous thing to happen for
Yeah.
multiple reasons. Focus on the local. Focus on what you have control over, and make sure that relationship that you have with your spouse or with your girlfriend or with your partner in general, make sure that you bring that to a level where it could be.
Yeah. And I think this is very important, that you give importance to your partner. He or she should they should feel that they have a say in a relationship. Whenever any person starts to feel like they don't have a say in a relationship, everything falls apart, because they don't feel important. They don't feel that their opinion matters.
It's how you create resentment.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the most toxic emotions one can feel.
Yeah.
Beautiful. What's next for you, Faizan?
Next for me, I feel
what are your 5 to 10 year plans?
What is my 5 to 10 year plans? The first most important plan that I see for myself is getting married, hopefully.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that's something, a lot of people say that you shouldn't think about marriage just because of the age. I feel like it's personal opinion, of course, like everybody has their own opinion and they have the right to have their own opinion. For me personally, I feel like age, of course, matters a lot. Regardless of whether you accept it or not, I personally feel age matters a lot because of various reasons. And I'm simply looking at it in as how I look at any other business, right? So, for example, thumb of rule, right? Let's say I'm 35. I get married next year. I will be 35. I'll be 36 next year, right? So next year I'm 36. I get married next year. Let's say if everything is according to how you want to rationalize it, after 1 year, I'm having my first kid. I will be 37 by then. When he graduates, it will be 17, 18 years, right? So that is 37 plus 18, let's say. So I will be 55 years old when my first kid is graduating. So I have to take care of my first kid until I'm 55. So that means I have to plan my financial resources for my kid, my first kid, until I'm 55. Right? So this is where I'm coming from. The longer I wait, the time frame increases. Average age in my country of a person to live is close to 60, 58, 60 years. So by the time my first kid is graduating, I'm dying. Okay.
60?
Yeah. Average age. So looking at it statistically, solely statistically, hopefully I'm wrong, but solely statistically, by the time by the time my first kid is graduating, I'm already dying, or I'm close to dying. So what time did I give to my kids? You get what I mean? Unless you don't want kids, then it's another story.
Yeah, it makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully that works out for you, Faizan. Fingers crossed.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I really appreciate it.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the conversation with you, even though we have to cut it a bit short.
Yeah.
Really fun, really cool insights. Thank you very much for that.
You're most welcome, Jeffrey. I really appreciate your time, and definitely, like I feel like because of time constraint, we couldn't talk about in a lot in detail about a few things, and hopefully, in the future, we can definitely collaborate again, and hopefully, you can come on my channel as well.
Definitely more than welcome. I will definitely
Yeah,
like to follow up on a couple of things that we didn't manage to discuss today. So yeah, for sure, we'll stay in touch. Let's go that route. Perfect.
definitely. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. Have a nice day, man.
Amazing. You too, Faizan. And with that, Faizan Ali has left the conversation. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. Leaving a comment or review is also a great way to support the podcast. And before we end this episode, I'd like to leave you with a quote from Carl Jung. Your visions will become clear only when you look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens. Thank you for listening and take care.